I spent 6 months doing my coworker's job while she took credit, and when I finally started saying no, she went to HR claiming I created a hostile work environment. So I pulled out receipts. I started working at a marketing firm right out of college and stayed for 8 years. I worked my way up from assistant to senior account manager through long hours and consistent results. I earned every promotion and every raise by being reliable and competent. When new employees joined our team, I helped train them because I remembered how overwhelming the job felt at first. I wanted to be the kind of coworker I wished I'd had when I was starting out. That generosity came back to bite me when Iris joined the company. Iris was hired as an account coordinator, the same position I held years ago. She was supposed to handle basic client communications, schedule meetings, prepare reports, and support the senior staff. During her first week, our manager asked me to show her the systems and answer any questions. I agreed because I always agreed to help with onboarding. Iris asked a lot of questions that first week. I thought that was a good sign. She seemed eager to learn, and I appreciated her enthusiasm. I spent hours walking her through processes and explaining how things worked. I gave her templates I'd created over the years to make her job easier. I shared shortcuts I'd discovered through trial and error. I basically handed her a roadmap to success if she wanted to use it. She didn't want to use it. What Iris wanted was for me to do her work while she got credit for it. It started small. She asked me to proofread a client's email before she sent it. Then she asked me to edit a report because she wasn't sure about the formatting. Then she asked me to just finish the report because she was running behind. Then she started forwarding me tasks directly and asking if I could handle them since I was so much better at this stuff anyway. Within 2 months, I was doing half of Iris's job on top of my own full workload. She came to my desk multiple times a day with requests that weren't actually requests. They were expectations. She assumed I would help because I always had. She stopped trying to learn the systems because why bother when I would do everything for her? She spent her extra time chatting with coworkers, taking long lunches, and leaving early whenever possible. Our manager praised Iris for how quickly she adapted to the role. He didn't know I was the one adapting for her. I kept quiet at first because I didn't want to seem uncooperative. I told myself it would get better once she settled in. 6 months later, nothing had changed. Iris still couldn't complete basic tasks without my help. She still forwarded me work she didn't feel like doing. She still took credit for reports I wrote and presentations I designed. Meanwhile, my own performance started slipping because I was stretched too thin. I missed a deadline for the first time in 5 years because I was too busy finishing Iris's project. I decided to stop. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't confront her. I just started saying no. When Iris forwarded me a task, I forwarded it back and said she should try using the templates I gave her. When she asked me to proofread something, I said I was too busy with my own work. When she asked me to just finish something real quick, I said I couldn't, and suggested she ask our manager for an extension if she was overwhelmed. Iris did not handle this well. The first week of saying no, she laughed and said I must be joking. The second week, she got annoyed and asked what my problem was. The third week, she started complaining to coworkers that I was being difficult and unhelpful. In the fourth week, she went to HR. I got called into a meeting with our HR representative and my manager. They said a colleague had filed a complaint about my behavior. They said I was creating a hostile work environment by refusing to collaborate and being cold and dismissive. They said multiple incidents had been reported where I refused to help a struggling team member. They asked if I had anything to say. I had a lot to say. I explained that I spent 6 months doing Iris's work for her. I explained that my own performance suffered because I was carrying 2 workloads. I explained that when I finally set boundaries, I was accused of being hostile. I asked if it was hostile to expect a colleague to do the job she was hired for. I asked if refusing to do someone else's work counted as not collaborating. My manager looked uncomfortable. He asked for specifics. I gave him specifics. I told him about the reports I wrote that had Iris's name on them. I told him about the emails I drafted that she sent. I told him about the presentations I created that she delivered. I told him I could go through my sent folder and show him exactly how much of Iris's job I had been doing. The HR representative asked Iris to join the meeting. When she walked in and saw me, her face changed. She clearly expected this would be a one-sided conversation where I got reprimanded and she got sympathy. Instead, she got questions. The HR representative leaned back in her chair and turned to Iris. She asked what specific things I did that made her feel like the workplace was hostile. Iris sat up straighter and started talking. She said I refused to help her with reports when she asked. She said I wouldn't proofread her emails anymore. She said I was dismissive and cold when she came to me for help with basic tasks. She made it sound like I was being cruel to someone who just needed support. The HR representative wrote everything down while Iris talked. My manager shifted in his seat and looked uncomfortable. I sat there watching Iris perform her victim routine. I felt anger building in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just waited for my turn to respond. The HR representative's pen moved across her notepad as she captured every detail Iris was giving her. Iris kept going. She said I used to be so helpful and then suddenly changed. She said she didn't understand what she did wrong to make me treat her this way. She looked genuinely hurt. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her myself. The HR representative finished writing and looked at me. She asked if I wanted to respond to what Iris had said. I took a breath and spoke calmly. I explained that I spent 6 months doing Iris's work for her while she took all the credit. I said I only recently started setting boundaries by expecting her to actually do her own job. I told them that refusing to be exploited isn't the same thing as being hostile. My manager's eyes got wider as I talked. He looked surprised, and I could see him starting to put pieces together in his head. The HR representative asked if I had any proof to back up what I was saying. I reached down and pulled my laptop out of my bag. I set it on the conference table and opened it. I told them I could walk through my sent folder and show them months of emails where I completed tasks that were supposed to be Iris's responsibility. I said the evidence was all there if they wanted to see it. Iris jumped in before the HR representative could respond. She said I volunteered to help her and she never forced me to do anything. Her voice had an edge to it now. I nodded and agreed that I did help voluntarily at first. I said that was during her training period when she was supposed to be learning. But then I pointed out that it became something else entirely when she stopped trying to learn anything and just started expecting me to do her work for her permanently. The HR representative held up her hand to stop us from talking over each other. She said she wanted to see the email evidence I mentioned. I turned my laptop so she and my manager could see the screen. I opened my sent folder and started scrolling. I showed them messages where Iris forwarded me her assigned tasks. The emails had subject lines like client reports and presentation prep. Inside the emails, Iris wrote things asking if I could just handle this one. She wrote that I was so much better at this stuff than she was. The messages were right there in black and white. My manager leaned forward to get a closer look at the screen. I watched his face change as he read through the emails. He started recognizing the work. The reports he praised Iris for had my name in the email data. You could see exactly who created each document and when. His expression went from confused to concerned. He sat back in his chair and rubbed his face with his hand. I clicked on another email thread from 3 months back. This one showed Iris forwarding me an entire client presentation that she was supposed to create. I had to build the whole thing from scratch because she sent it to me the day before it was due. She delivered that presentation in a team meeting and everyone congratulated her on the great work. My manager remembered that presentation. I could see it in his eyes when I showed him the email. The HR representative asked how many times this happened over the 6 months. I scrolled through my sent folder and started counting out loud. I found emails from every single week, sometimes multiple emails in 1 week. I got to 40 instances where I completed major work that Iris was assigned and she put her name on it. 40 times in 6 months. The HR representative wrote that number down and underlined it. Iris's face had gone completely pale. She started talking fast. She said the emails were being taken out of context. She said it wasn't as bad as it looked. The HR representative cut her off and asked her a direct question. She asked what context would make it okay for Iris to have a coworker complete her assigned work while she received all the credit for it. Iris opened her mouth but nothing came out. She looked at my manager like she wanted him to help her. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the laptop screen where all the evidence was still displayed. Iris tried to speak but her voice came out shaky and unsure. She said something about still being in training and thinking it was normal to ask senior staff for help. I leaned forward in my chair and kept my voice calm and professional. I explained that I wasn't her supervisor and never had been. I said helping a new person occasionally with questions was completely different from doing someone's entire job for them for 6 months straight. The HR representative wrote something down in her notebook and looked at my manager. He shifted in his seat and cleared his throat before speaking. He asked me why I never brought this situation to his attention sooner. I felt my face get warm because I knew this question was coming. I admitted that I didn't want to seem like someone who couldn't handle extra work or who wasn't a team player. I said I kept hoping Iris would eventually start completing her own tasks once she learned the systems. I told him I thought the problem would solve itself if I just gave it enough time. My manager nodded slowly and looked down at the table. The HR representative turned her attention to Iris and asked her a direct question. She wanted to know if Iris actually completed the reports that my manager had praised her for during team meetings. The room went completely silent. Iris stared at the table and didn't say anything for what felt like a full minute. Her face had turned red and she kept opening her mouth like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she said that I had helped significantly with most of them. I almost laughed at how much she was downplaying it. Significantly was the biggest understatement I'd ever heard. I didn't help with those reports. I wrote them from start to finish while she did nothing. The HR representative made more notes and her expression stayed neutral, but I could tell she was processing what that admission meant. I decided to show them more evidence while I had their attention. I pulled up my work calendar on my laptop and turned the screen so they could both see it. I scrolled back through the past 6 months and showed them all the late nights I had logged. The calendar had entries for staying until 7 or 8 at night multiple times per week. I explained that I stayed late to finish Iris's assigned work after I completed my own assignments during regular hours. My manager leaned in close to look at the dates. I watched his face change as he started connecting the dots. I pointed out specific dates when I stayed late and matched them to projects that Iris had been assigned. His expression went from uncomfortable to genuinely upset. He sat back in his chair and rubbed his hand over his face again. I could see him realizing that my recent performance problems started right around the time I stopped staying late to do Iris's work. The timeline was right there in black and white. When I was doing both jobs, my own work suffered because I didn't have enough hours in the day. The HR representative asked if anyone else on the team might have witnessed this pattern of behavior. I thought about it for a second and then mentioned Natasha Whitfield. I said Natasha sits in the cubicle next to mine and probably noticed Iris coming to my desk constantly throughout the day. I told them Natasha would have seen Iris leaving at 5 o'clock every day while I stayed late working on things. My manager wrote down Natasha's name on the notepad in front of him. He said he would like to speak with Natasha to get her perspective on what she observed. The HR representative agreed immediately and said she would schedule a follow-up interview with Natasha and possibly other team members who might have relevant information. Iris must have realized things were not going the way she planned. She jumped in and tried to change the direction of the conversation. She said that even if I had helped her with work, my recent attitude toward her had been hostile and cold. She said I created an uncomfortable environment that made it hard for her to do her job. I took a slow breath before responding. I told her that setting professional boundaries after 6 months of being exploited wasn't hostility. I said it was self-preservation. I explained that I had every right to stop doing work that wasn't my responsibility. The HR representative looked at Iris and asked what specific behaviors she found hostile. Iris started listing things, but they all sounded completely reasonable to me. She said I told her I was too busy to help when she asked. She said I suggested she ask our manager for extensions if she felt overwhelmed. She said I forwarded her tasks back to her instead of completing them like I used to. I waited until she finished talking and then I responded. I explained that every single one of those behaviors was a reasonable professional response when a colleague expects you to do their work. I said telling someone you're too busy is not hostile. I said suggesting they talk to their supervisor about workload is not hostile. I said returning tasks that aren't your responsibility is not hostile. The HR representative nodded while I spoke and wrote more notes. She seemed to be making a distinction between actual hostile behavior and normal boundary setting. My manager turned to Iris and asked her a question that clearly caught her off guard. He wanted to know why she didn't come to him when she felt overwhelmed with her workload instead of relying on me to complete her tasks. Iris opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. She stammered something about thinking she was supposed to figure things out on her own. My manager's expression made it clear he didn't buy that explanation. He said his door was always open for questions about workload and task prioritization. He said that's literally part of his job as a manager. Iris didn't have a good response to that. The HR representative closed her notebook and looked at both of us. She said she needed time to review all the evidence and conduct additional interviews before making any determinations. She asked both Iris and me to avoid discussing the situation with other coworkers during the investigation. I nodded and said I understood. Iris mumbled something that sounded like agreement, but she wouldn't look at either of us. The HR representative stood up and thanked us for our time. She said she would be in touch with updates as the investigation progressed. Iris practically ran out of the conference room. I gathered my laptop and the papers I'd brought. My hands felt shaky from the adrenaline of confronting everything. My manager asked me to stay behind as the HR representative left. Once Iris was gone and the door closed, his whole posture changed. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. He apologized for not noticing what was happening. He said he should have been paying closer attention to work attribution. I appreciated the apology, but I also felt guilty. I told him I should have spoken up sooner instead of letting the situation continue for 6 months. He shook his head and said we both made mistakes. But the evidence clearly showed Iris exploited my willingness to help, and then filed a false complaint when I stopped. He said the email records don't lie. He said the timestamps on those documents don't lie. He said he remembered praising Iris for work that I actually created, and he felt like an idiot. I told him he wasn't an idiot. I said I made it easy for her to take credit by never saying anything. He disagreed. He said as a manager it was his job to verify work and pay attention to who was actually producing results. He said he got lazy and assumed things were fine because deadlines were being met. My manager said he would cooperate fully with HR's investigation and make sure the truth came out. He also said he wanted to meet with me separately later to discuss how this affected my recent performance reviews. He said it wasn't fair that I got dinged for missing deadlines when I was carrying 2 workloads. I thanked him and left the conference room. I walked back to my desk feeling emotionally exhausted, but also relieved that the evidence was finally being examined. My legs felt heavy and my head hurt from the stress of the meeting. Natasha caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. She clearly knew something happened based on how long I was gone. I gave her a small smile and sat down at my desk. I tried to focus on actual work, but my brain kept replaying the meeting. The next day felt strange. Iris avoided me completely. She came in early and kept her head down at her desk. I focused on my own projects and tried not to think about the investigation. Around 10 in the morning, the HR representative came by and asked Natasha if she had time for a conversation. Natasha looked at me briefly before following the HR representative to a conference room. They were gone for about 40 minutes. When Natasha came back to her desk, she looked serious, but she didn't say anything right away. Later that afternoon, she stopped by my desk and said she was glad I finally said something. She confirmed she witnessed Iris constantly interrupting my work with requests, and noticed I stayed late frequently while Iris left on time. She said she almost spoke up several times but didn't want to overstep. I told her I appreciated her being honest with HR. The HR representative also interviewed Regina Hurley from IT. Regina pulled official records of document creation and email timestamps. Her analysis showed clear patterns of me creating deliverables that Iris submitted as her own work. Regina came by my desk later and mentioned the metadata doesn't lie. She said every file has a digital fingerprint showing who created it and when. She said the patterns were obvious once she looked at the data. 3 days into the investigation, I got an email from Iris. She apologized for any misunderstanding and said she hoped we could work together professionally. The email sounded fake and rehearsed. I read it twice and then forwarded it to HR without responding. I recognized it as an attempt to make herself look cooperative. The HR representative thanked me for sending it and said it was smart not to respond. She also mentioned she was interviewing Denise Kaufman, another account coordinator who started around the same time as Iris. Denise came to find me after her interview. She mentioned that Iris tried similar tactics with her, but she shut it down quickly by refusing to do Iris's work. Denise said she told HR that Iris seemed to target people who were helpful and generous. She said Iris tested boundaries with everyone until she found someone who would give in. My manager scheduled a private meeting with me to discuss my performance reviews. We met in his office with the door closed. He pulled up my evaluations from the past 6 months on his computer. He acknowledged that my recent struggles were directly caused by carrying 2 workloads. He said he would be adjusting my evaluation to reflect the circumstances. He showed me where he noted that my performance decline coincided exactly with when I started doing Iris's work. He said he was submitting an amended review to HR and recommending I receive the raise I should have gotten before all this happened. I felt relief wash over me. I thanked him for taking the time to make it right. 8 days after my manager told me he would adjust my evaluation, I got an email from the HR representative. She wanted to schedule a meeting for the following afternoon with me, Iris, my manager, and the company president. The message was brief and professional, but the fact that the president would be there told me everything I needed to know. This was serious. I replied confirming my availability and then sat at my desk trying to focus on work. The rest of the day dragged. I kept checking the clock and refreshing my email. Natasha noticed I was distracted and asked if I was okay. I told her about the meeting and she squeezed my shoulder. She said the truth was on my side and everything would work out. I wanted to believe her, but I still felt anxious. That night I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head and wondering what the president would say. The next morning I arrived at work 30 minutes early. I reviewed my sent folder one more time and made sure I had access to all the documentation if anyone asked for additional proof. At 2 in the afternoon, I walked to the large conference room on the executive floor. My manager was already there looking uncomfortable. Iris arrived a minute later and sat as far from me as possible. She stared at the table and didn't make eye contact with anyone. The company president came in with the HR representative. He was a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and a serious expression. He shook hands with my manager and then sat down at the head of the table. The HR representative opened her laptop and pulled up a document on the screen. She started by thanking everyone for coming and explaining that she had completed a thorough investigation into the workplace complaint. She said she interviewed multiple people, reviewed extensive documentation, and analyzed digital records. Then she began presenting her findings. The HR representative displayed a timeline on the screen showing 6 months of documented instances where I completed work that was assigned to Iris. Each entry included the date, the task description, email evidence, and document metadata, proving I created the deliverables. She had organized everything chronologically and color-coded different types of tasks. The visual made it impossible to deny the pattern. She explained that the evidence included email records showing Iris forwarding me her assigned work, document metadata proving I created reports and presentations that had Iris's name on them, and witness statements from 3 coworkers who observed the dynamic. Natasha had provided detailed observations about Iris coming to my desk constantly with requests. Regina from IT confirmed the digital fingerprints on files matched my user account, even though Iris submitted them. Denise described how Iris tried similar tactics with her, but she refused to do Iris's work. The HR representative went through specific examples. She showed the client presentation from 3 months ago, where the file creation data proved I built every slide even though Iris delivered it and received praise. She showed email threads where Iris forwarded me entire projects with messages asking me to handle them, because I was better at this stuff. She showed my calendar entries demonstrating I regularly stayed late while Iris left on time. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The HR representative stated clearly that the evidence does not support Iris's claim of a hostile work environment. She said the investigation revealed that Iris systematically exploited a colleague's willingness to help over a 6-month period. She explained that when I finally established professional boundaries by declining to continue doing Iris's work, Iris filed a retaliatory complaint accusing me of creating a hostile environment. The words hung in the air. Iris opened her mouth to say something, but the company president held up his hand. He asked her to let the HR representative finish presenting the findings. His expression was stern and completely professional as he reviewed the documentation on the screen. He flipped through printed copies of the evidence and made notes on a legal pad. The HR representative continued explaining that Iris's behavior constitutes both performance fraud and filing a false complaint. She said performance fraud occurred because Iris took credit for work she did not complete and misled management about her actual contributions. She said the false complaint was a serious violation because it abused the HR process and attempted to punish a colleague for refusing to be exploited. My manager spoke up and confirmed he was completely misled about work attribution for multiple projects. He said he praised Iris for deliverables I actually created, and he had no idea the extent of what was happening. He looked embarrassed as he admitted he should have been paying closer attention to his team. The company president turned to Iris and asked if she disputes any of the documented evidence. Iris's face was pale and her hands were shaking slightly. She said the emails are real and she can't deny them. But she insisted she didn't understand she was doing anything wrong by asking for help. She said she thought it was normal to get assistance from senior staff, and she never meant to take advantage of anyone. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I spoke up and said that asking for help is absolutely appropriate when someone is learning a new role. But expecting a coworker to complete your assigned work while you take credit for it crosses a clear line. I said the difference between asking for guidance and having someone do your job for you should be obvious. The president nodded and said the distinction is obvious to anyone acting in good faith. He said asking questions and requesting training is professional development. Having a colleague complete your deliverables while you receive recognition is fraud. He made it clear there was no gray area in this situation. The company president announced that Iris is being placed on an immediate performance improvement plan with 60 days to demonstrate she can complete her job responsibilities independently. He said she will have clearly defined benchmarks and weekly check-ins with her manager. If she fails to meet the requirements, her employment will be terminated. He said this is her only opportunity to prove she can actually do the job she was hired for. Additionally, the false HR complaint will be documented in Iris's personnel file as a serious policy violation. The president said retaliatory complaints undermine the integrity of the entire workplace complaint process. He explained that when employees file false accusations, it makes it harder for people with legitimate concerns to be taken seriously. He said the company takes this extremely seriously, and any future violations will result in immediate termination. My manager was directed to provide weekly supervision of Iris's work to ensure she's completing her own tasks without relying on others. The president also instructed him to implement better oversight practices for the entire team to prevent similar situations from happening again. He said managers need to verify work attribution and pay attention to who is actually creating deliverables versus who is submitting them. The meeting ended and everyone stood up to leave. The HR representative caught up with me in the hallway after everyone else had left the conference room. She pulled me aside near the water cooler and told me I handled everything really professionally. She said the documentation I provided made the investigation straightforward, and the fact that I stuck to facts instead of getting emotional helped my case significantly. She mentioned that a lot of people in similar situations either don't keep records, or they get too worked up to present their evidence clearly. She told me I should feel proud of how I advocated for myself. Then she said something that stuck with me. She encouraged me to come forward sooner if anything like this ever happens again. She explained that 6 months is a long time to carry that kind of burden, and the company would rather address problems early than let them grow into major conflicts. I nodded and thanked her for taking the complaint seriously, and actually investigating instead of just assuming I was being difficult. She smiled and said that's literally her job, but she appreciated that I made it easier by having everything organized. We shook hands, and she headed back to her office while I walked slowly back to my desk. I sat down at my computer and stared at my inbox for a minute. The relief felt strange, like I'd been holding my breath for months and finally remembered how to exhale properly. But underneath that relief was this weird anxiety about what happens next. The team dynamics were definitely going to shift. People had witnessed the investigation, seen Iris called into meetings, watched the whole situation unfold. I wondered how my coworkers would treat me now. Would they think I was a snitch for going to HR with evidence? Would they be more careful around me? I pulled up the client file I'd been working on before all this started and tried to focus on the actual work I was supposed to be doing. My hands felt shaky on the keyboard. Natasha appeared at my desk about 20 minutes later. She leaned against the cubicle wall and gave me this knowing look. She told me she was glad I finally stood up for myself. She said she'd watched Iris take advantage of me for months, and it drove her crazy. She admitted she almost said something herself several times but didn't want to overstep. I told her I appreciated that she was willing to give a statement to HR when they asked. She waved that off and said it was just the truth. She mentioned that Iris had tried similar stuff with her early on, but she shut it down immediately by refusing to do any of Iris's work. She said some people will push boundaries as far as you let them, and Iris was definitely that type. We talked for a few more minutes before Natasha headed back to her own desk. That conversation helped more than she probably realized. The first week after the findings were presented was uncomfortable in a different way than before. Iris avoided me completely. She arrived at the office early every morning, earlier than I'd ever seen her come in during the entire time she worked here. She went straight to her desk, kept her head down, and worked without interrupting anyone. She didn't chat with coworkers in the break room. She didn't take long lunches. She left exactly at closing time, not a minute before or after. I could see her struggling with tasks from across the room. Her face would scrunch up in concentration as she stared at her computer screen. Sometimes she'd pull out the templates I'd given her months ago, the ones she never bothered to use when I was doing everything for her. She'd flip through printouts and type slowly, clearly trying to figure out processes she should have learned during her first month. Part of me felt bad watching her struggle, but a bigger part of me remembered that this is what she was hired to do in the first place. Nobody expected her to be perfect. They just expected her to actually try to complete her own assigned work. The fact that she was finding it difficult now proved she'd never been doing the job herself before. My manager started checking in with me regularly. He'd stop by my desk every couple of days and ask how things were going. He wanted to make sure Iris wasn't trying to pull me back into the old pattern despite the clear directive that she needed to work independently. He'd ask if she'd approached me with any requests, or if I felt any pressure to help her. I appreciated his attention to this. It showed he understood how easy it would be for the whole cycle to start again if nobody was paying attention. I told him honestly that Iris hadn't spoken to me at all since the meeting. He nodded and said that was probably for the best while she focused on her improvement plan. He mentioned he was keeping close tabs on her work, and she was meeting with him daily to review her progress. He said it was taking up a lot of his time, but it was necessary to verify she could actually do the job. I could tell he felt somewhat responsible for not catching this earlier. He'd been praising work I created while Iris took credit, and that had to sting his professional pride. 2 weeks into Iris's performance improvement plan, I watched something happen that should have happened from the very beginning. Iris walked over to our manager's office with a client report in her hands. She knocked on his doorframe and asked if he had time to help her with something. He waved her in and spent the next 30 minutes walking her through the process step by step. He showed her how to format the sections properly, where to pull the data from our system, how to structure the analysis so clients could understand it easily. I could hear his patient voice explaining things through the office walls. This is what training actually looks like. This is what should have happened when she first started instead of her coming to me and expecting me to just do it for her. When she came out of his office, she looked tired, but she was holding the report and heading back to her desk to finish it herself. Our manager looked exhausted too. Teaching someone takes energy and time, which is exactly why Iris had avoided learning and just dumped everything on me instead. I started noticing my own work quality improving in ways I hadn't even realized had slipped. Without carrying 2 workloads, I could actually focus on doing my job well instead of just trying to survive each day. I met deadlines easily, sometimes finishing projects early with time to review and polish them. My manager noticed too. He assigned me a new high-profile client account, one that required detailed strategy work and regular presentations. He told me specifically that he was giving it to me because he knew I could handle it, and he wanted me working on projects that matched my actual skill level. That assignment felt like vindication. It proved that my recent struggles weren't because I'd somehow lost my abilities. They were because I'd been doing 2 people's jobs and nobody knew it except me. I dove into the new client work with energy I hadn't felt in months. I created presentation materials that I was genuinely proud of. I scheduled meetings and showed up prepared. I felt like myself again professionally. At the 30-day checkpoint of Iris's improvement plan, my manager called me into his office for an update. He told me Iris was technically meeting the minimum requirements they'd set for her, but she was struggling significantly. She'd asked him for help multiple times every single week. She'd worked late several nights trying to complete basic tasks that should have taken her a few hours at most. He showed me the benchmarks they'd established and the tracking sheet documenting her progress. Every item had a check mark showing she'd completed it, but the notes section revealed how much difficulty she'd had with each one. He asked if I thought she'd eventually get up to speed, or if this was just her actual capability level. I told him honestly that I wasn't sure. I said maybe she'd improve with more practice, or maybe she was genuinely in over her head for this role. He nodded slowly and said they'd have to see how the next 30 days went. He thanked me for my perspective, and I headed back to my desk. Denise stopped by my cubicle one afternoon and spoke quietly so others wouldn't overhear. She told me Iris had tried to complain to her about the improvement plan being unfair and too demanding. Denise said she shut that down immediately by pointing out that doing your own job isn't an unreasonable expectation. She said Iris seemed shocked that Denise wouldn't sympathize with her. Denise mentioned that Iris had tried the same approach with her that she'd used with me, asking for help with things and then gradually asking for more and more. But Denise had recognized the pattern early and refused to enable it. She told Iris from the start that she'd answer questions and explain processes once, but she wouldn't do Iris's work for her. Denise said it was uncomfortable at first because Iris would act hurt or confused when she said no, but eventually Iris stopped asking her and moved on to easier targets. I realized I'd been the easier target. I'd been too willing to help, too concerned about being seen as a team player, too worried about saying no. Denise's approach had been smarter and healthier from the beginning. I focused hard on rebuilding my professional reputation and reminding my manager of what I could actually do when I wasn't being exploited. The new client account he'd assigned me became my priority. I delivered excellent work on every aspect of it. I sent detailed progress reports. I anticipated problems before they happened and had solutions ready. During our team meeting that week, the client sent an email praising the strategy I'd developed, and the manager read it aloud to everyone. He specifically credited me by name and said this was the kind of work he expected from senior staff. I felt several coworkers glance at me with respect. Natasha gave me a subtle thumbs up from across the table. Even that small moment of recognition felt important. It reminded everyone, including myself, that I was good at my actual job when I had the time and energy to focus on it properly. At the 60-day review of Iris's improvement plan, my manager and the HR representative met with her to evaluate her progress. My manager told me about it later that afternoon. He said Iris had technically met the minimum benchmarks they'd set, but it was obvious she was barely hanging on. She'd completed all required tasks, but many of them needed significant corrections. She'd asked for help constantly throughout the entire 60 days. She'd worked overtime almost every week just to meet basic expectations. The HR representative and my manager discussed whether she was genuinely improving or just scraping by. They decided to extend her probationary period another 30 days to see if she'd show real progress or continue struggling. My manager said he wasn't optimistic, but they wanted to give her every fair chance to succeed. He told me the extension meant another month of close supervision and daily check-ins. I could tell he was tired of the whole situation. He'd spent hours of his time training and monitoring someone who should have been competent enough to work independently by now. 2 weeks after the extended probation period began, Iris walked into my manager's office and handed him a resignation letter. She told him she'd accepted a position at another company. My manager accepted her resignation immediately and told her she could leave after completing her exit interview with HR. She cleaned out her desk within 3 days and disappeared from the office without saying goodbye to anyone. The team barely noticed her absence. My manager scheduled interviews for a replacement account coordinator the following week. He asked me to sit in on the interviews and give my opinion about each candidate. I appreciated being included in the process. During the interviews, I watched carefully for red flags. I asked candidates about how they handle learning new systems and what they do when they feel overwhelmed with tasks. I paid attention to whether they asked questions about the actual work or just about benefits and time off. One candidate named Avery Ross stood out immediately. She asked specific questions about our client management software and wanted to know what a typical day looked like for the position. She took notes during the interview and asked smart follow-up questions about team structure. When my manager described a challenging client scenario, Avery walked through how she'd approach it step by step. After the interviews ended, my manager asked what I thought. I told him Avery seemed genuinely interested in learning and showed initiative by asking detailed questions. He agreed and offered her the position that afternoon. Avery started 2 weeks later. I handled her onboarding training but approached it differently than I had with Iris. On her first day, I explained that I'd show her each system once and answer questions, but I expected her to take notes and practice on her own. I told her directly that I'd help her learn, but I wouldn't do her work for her. Avery seemed relieved by the clear expectations. She took detailed notes during every training session. She asked questions when she didn't understand something, but then she practiced until she got it right. When she made mistakes, she fixed them herself instead of asking me to do it. Within 2 weeks, Avery was handling basic tasks independently. She'd check in with me occasionally to make sure she was on the right track, but she completed her own assignments. The contrast with Iris was so obvious that it almost felt unreal. My manager noticed it too. During a team meeting, he commented that Avery had adapted quickly to the role. He pulled me aside afterward and said he should have recognized the red flags with Iris sooner. He admitted he'd been too focused on praising what he thought was good work, instead of verifying who actually did it. 3 months after Iris left, my manager called me into his office for a meeting. He told me the company was promoting me to lead account manager with a significant raise. He said the promotion was based on my professionalism during the difficult situation with Iris, and my consistently excellent work once I stopped being exploited. He specifically mentioned that I'd handled everything with documentation and facts instead of emotions or drama. The promotion came with new responsibilities, including authority to supervise junior staff members. I could now officially set standards and expectations for the team. I immediately started working on clear guidelines about what collaboration looked like versus unhealthy dependency. I wrote up a document explaining when it's appropriate to ask for help versus when someone needs to solve problems independently. My manager approved the guidelines and distributed them to the entire team. Natasha stopped by my desk the day after my promotion was announced. She told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything with Iris. She admitted she'd almost spoken up several times when she noticed what was happening, but she wasn't sure if it was her place to get involved. I thanked her for being willing to provide a witness statement when it mattered most. Her testimony had been crucial in showing the pattern of Iris's behavior. My manager used the entire situation as a learning experience for the team. He implemented new practices for tracking work attribution, so it would be easier to identify who completed which tasks. He started conducting regular check-ins with each team member to identify problems before they got out of control. He told everyone that asking for help was encouraged, but taking credit for someone else's work would result in immediate consequences. I started mentoring Avery and another new hire who joined shortly after her. This time I was conscious about the difference between teaching someone skills and enabling them to avoid learning. I showed both junior staff members how to complete tasks. Then I watched them practice until they could do it independently. Both of them developed strong skills and worked on their own within their first few months. They'd ask questions when genuinely stuck, but they always tried to solve problems themselves first. 6 months after the HR investigation concluded, I sat at my desk reviewing the new client accounts I'd been assigned. My workload was challenging, but manageable now that I was only responsible for my own job. I thought about how the experience had taught me an important lesson about boundaries. Being helpful didn't mean sacrificing my own work and well-being to enable someone else's laziness. Setting boundaries when Iris expected me to do her job wasn't hostile behavior. It was necessary and long overdue. I should have said no much sooner instead of letting the situation continue for 6 months. A few months later, I sat in the quarterly leadership meeting taking notes on my laptop when the company president brought up workplace policies. He explained that the firm had updated several procedures based on recent situations that exposed gaps in their systems. He mentioned work attribution tracking and complaint verification processes specifically. He didn't use my name, but everyone in the room knew he was talking about what happened with Iris. He said the changes would help prevent similar problems in the future and protect employees who speak up about workplace issues. I felt weird hearing my situation discussed in front of the leadership team, but I was glad something good came from everything I went through. The new policies meant other people wouldn't have to deal with what I dealt with for 6 months. My annual performance review happened 2 weeks after that leadership meeting. My manager sat across from me with my evaluation pulled up on his screen. He went through each category, and I watched the ratings appear next to different skills and competencies. Everything came back excellent or exceeds expectations. He specifically noted my technical abilities and the way I handled the challenging situation with Iris. He said I showed real skill in documenting everything and presenting facts instead of getting emotional or dramatic. The review acknowledged that my brief performance dip was directly caused by carrying 2 workloads, and my current work proved my actual capabilities. He told me the promotion and raise from earlier in the year were just the beginning of my career growth at the firm. My path forward looked stronger than it ever had before. I thought about everything that happened as I drove home that evening. Standing up for myself had felt terrible at the time, because I worried people would think I was difficult or uncooperative. Pulling out those emails and showing exactly what Iris had done felt uncomfortable even though I knew I was right. But using documentation and facts instead of accusations or emotions was absolutely the right choice. Nobody could argue with the evidence I presented. I learned that I could defend myself and maintain good relationships with my coworkers at the same time. The experience changed how I think about helping people at work. Being generous with my time and knowledge is still important to me, but I know now where the line is between helping someone learn and letting them take advantage. I won't cross that line again.